The elders of my tribe have kept this secret for over 400 years, and now, at 83 years old, I am the last keeper of the covenant, the last one who speaks directly with the forest people. What they have told me about humanity, about our true nature and our inevitable fate, is something that will haunt you long after you finish hearing my words. My name is Joseph Clearwater, and I am a member of the Stillaguamish people of the Pacific Northwest. This is the story my grandmother made me swear to protect, and why I have finally decided the world needs to hear it before the knowledge dies with me. I need to take you back to the summer of 1951, when I was 11 years old and my grandmother, Mary Singing Bird, decided I was ready to learn the truth about our family's sacred responsibility. We lived on the reservation near Arlington, Washington, in a small wooden house that my grandfather had built with his own hands in 1923. The house sat at the edge of the forest, right where the cleared land met the ancient Douglas firs that stretched up into the Cascade foothills. My grandmother used to say we lived on the border between two worlds. That July morning, she woke me before dawn. The sky was still purple-black, and I could hear owls calling in the distance. She placed her weathered hand on my shoulder and spoke in Lushootseed, our traditional language that fewer and fewer people were speaking even then. "Today you become a keeper," she said. "Today you learn why our family has lived on this edge of the forest for longer than anyone can remember." I dressed quickly in the darkness, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. My grandmother had always been mysterious about certain things, deflecting my questions with stories that seemed to change depending on when she told them. But there was something different in her voice that morning, something final and serious that told me this was not just another lesson about plants or animals or the old ways. We walked into the forest as the first gray light began filtering through the canopy. My grandmother moved with a certainty that surprised me, navigating fallen logs and thick underbrush as though she had walked this path 1,000 times before. We climbed steadily for over an hour, moving deeper into wilderness that I had always been told was forbidden to enter alone. The trees grew older and larger the farther we went, their trunks so massive that 3 men holding hands could not have encircled them. Finally, we reached a small clearing surrounded by cedars, so ancient they seemed to predate the world itself. In the center of the clearing was a flat stone, worn smooth by what must have been centuries of use, and around it were arranged smaller stones in a pattern I did not recognize. My grandmother sat on the large stone and gestured for me to sit beside her. "Before I tell you what I am about to tell you," she said, "you must understand what it means to be a keeper. It means you carry a weight that will never leave you. It means you guard a secret that could change everything if it were ever revealed. And it means you will sometimes be very lonely, because there are things you will know that you can never share with anyone outside our line." I nodded, trying to look brave even though my hands were trembling. "Our family has protected the forest people since before the white men came," she continued. "Before the Spanish ships appeared on the southern coasts, before the diseases that killed so many of our people. For over 400 years, Keeper has passed the responsibility to Keeper, and the covenant has never been broken." "Forest people," I repeated, not understanding. "You mean the Sasquatch? The wild men of the woods?" My grandmother smiled, but there was sadness in it. "The white men call them Bigfoot now. They make jokes about them, tell campfire stories, pretend they are just legends. But you know the truth, Joseph. You have always known, even if you did not have words for it. You have felt them watching when you walked too close to the deep woods. You have heard their calls at night and known they were not owls or coyotes." She was right. I had always felt something in those forests, a presence that seemed to observe without threatening, that moved just beyond the edge of vision. I had mentioned it to my mother once, and she had exchanged a look with my grandmother that I did not understand at the time. "They are real," my grandmother said, "as real as you or me. And they are far more than the monsters the white men imagine. They are ancient, Joseph, older than our people, older than any human tribe. They were here when the glaciers covered these mountains. They watched the first humans cross the land bridge from Asia. They have seen civilizations rise and fall while they remained hidden in the forests, watching, learning, remembering. How do you know all this?" I asked. "Because they told me, just as they told my grandmother and her grandmother before her. The keepers do not just protect the forest people from discovery. We speak with them, we learn from them, and we carry their messages to each generation so that the knowledge is never lost." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. "You talk to them. They can speak?" "Not the way you and I speak. Their throats are not made for human words, though some have learned to approximate our language over the centuries. But they communicate in other ways, through gestures, through sounds, through a kind of understanding that goes deeper than words. When you have spent enough time with them, you begin to feel what they mean rather than hear it." My grandmother stood and walked to the edge of the clearing. She made a sound I had never heard before, a low, rhythmic vocalization that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. She repeated it 3 times, then stood perfectly still, waiting. For several minutes, nothing happened. The forest was silent except for the wind moving through the high branches. I began to wonder if my grandmother had finally lost her grip on reality, if the stories she told were just the fantasies of an old woman who had spent too much time alone. And then I saw it. A shape emerged from the shadows between 2 massive cedars, and my entire understanding of the world shattered in an instant. It stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, reddish-brown hair that hung in long, shaggy strands. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms long and powerful, ending in hands that looked almost human but were far larger. And the face, that face would stay with me for the rest of my life. It was neither fully ape nor fully human, but something in between, something that looked at me with eyes that held unmistakable intelligence and what I could only describe as sorrow. The creature approached slowly, its movements surprisingly graceful for something so massive. It stopped about 15 feet from where my grandmother stood and made a sound, a low rumbling that seemed to resonate in my chest rather than my ears. My grandmother responded with her own vocalization, and then she did something that made me gasp. She walked forward and placed her hand on the creature's chest, right over where its heart would be. The creature placed its own enormous hand over hers, and they stood like that for several seconds, communicating in some way I could not perceive. Then my grandmother turned to me. "Joseph, come here. Do not be afraid. This is Walking Shadow. He has been the guardian of this territory for over 60 years. He knew my grandmother when she was a young woman, and he has agreed to meet you today." My legs felt like water, but I forced myself to stand and walk toward them. The creature, Walking Shadow, watched me approach with those deep brown eyes, and I felt something I had not expected. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of awe that made me want to kneel, to acknowledge that I was in the presence of something ancient and sacred. When I was close enough, Walking Shadow reached out one massive hand and touched my face. The touch was impossibly gentle, like being brushed by leaves in a light wind. And then I felt it, a sensation I struggle to describe even now, 72 years later. It was as though a door opened in my mind, and emotions that were not my own flowed through it. Curiosity about who I was, concern about whether I could be trusted, a deep, aching loneliness that took my breath away. And underneath it all, a sorrow so profound, it brought tears to my eyes. "He is greeting you," my grandmother said softly. "He is showing you what he feels, so you will understand that his people are not animals or monsters. They feel everything we feel and more. "What is making him so sad?" I managed to ask. My grandmother was quiet for a moment. "His people are dying, Joseph. There are fewer of them every generation. The forests shrink. The places they can hide become smaller. He has watched his children leave this territory because there is not enough space for them, and he does not know if he will ever see them again." Walking Shadow made another sound, and my grandmother listened intently. Then she nodded and turned back to me. "He wants to show you something. Will you go with us deeper into the forest? It is a long walk, and we will not return until tomorrow. But what you will see, what you will learn, it will change everything you understand about the world and about humanity." I looked at my grandmother, at Walking Shadow, at the ancient forest surrounding us. I was 11 years old, standing on the threshold of something I could barely comprehend. Part of me wanted to run back to the safety of our house, to pretend this was all a dream. But a larger part, the part that had always felt different from the other children on the reservation, the part that had always sensed there was more to the world than what could be seen and measured, that part said yes. We walked for the rest of that day, climbing higher into the mountains through terrain that grew increasingly wild and inaccessible. Walking Shadow moved through the forest with remarkable silence for something so large, somehow finding paths through the undergrowth that seemed to open before him and close behind. My grandmother kept pace despite her age, and I struggled to keep up with both of them, my young legs burning with the effort. As the sun began to set, we reached a valley I had never seen on any map, never heard mentioned in any story. It was hidden between two ridges, accessible only through a narrow gap in the rocks that would have been invisible to anyone who did not know exactly where to look. And in that valley, I saw something that changed my understanding of what the forest people truly were. There were structures in the valley, not caves or crude shelters, but actual structures made of woven branches and bark, arranged in a rough circle around a central clearing. They were not buildings in any human sense, but they showed clear intention and design. Someone had created this place. Someone had organized it according to a plan. And there were more of them. More forest people, at least a dozen that I could see, moving between the structures, sitting in small groups, tending what looked like a garden of wild plants along one edge of the valley. Some were as large as Walking Shadow. Others were smaller, including two that were clearly children, their movements quicker and more playful than the adults. My grandmother squeezed my hand. "This is their home," she said. "One of the last places where they can live as a community. There used to be many such places, but now there are only a few left, scattered across the most remote regions of the mountains." We descended into the valley as twilight settled over the forest. The forest people watched our approach, but none of them showed fear or aggression. Walking Shadow vocalized something, and one by one, they responded with sounds of their own. It seemed like a kind of announcement, a declaration that we were welcome, that we were under his protection. We were led to one of the larger structures where animal furs had been arranged into something like a seating area. As darkness fell completely, something remarkable happened. The forest people gathered in the central clearing, forming a loose circle. One of them, an individual even larger than Walking Shadow with silver-gray hair that suggested great age, moved to the center. And then this elder began to vocalize. Not the short sounds I had heard before, but a long rhythmic sequence that rose and fell like a song. The others joined in gradually, their voices weaving together into something that was undeniably music. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, deeper and more resonant than human singing, but unmistakably intentional, unmistakably art. They were singing together just as my own people had sung around fires for countless generations. "They have songs for everything," my grandmother whispered, "for greeting the sun and moon, for mourning their dead, for celebrating births, for remembering their history. This song is for us. It is a song of welcome for a new keeper. Tears were streaming down my face, though I could not have explained exactly why. It was too much, too beautiful, too overwhelming to process. These creatures that the world dismissed as monsters or myths were standing in front of me, singing a song they had composed to welcome me into their secret world. When the song ended, the gray elder approached us. He moved slowly, with the careful deliberation of extreme age, and when he sat down across from my grandmother and me, I could see the weight of years in his eyes. His name is Remembers Everything, my grandmother said. He is over 140 years old. He has been the keeper of their history since before my grandmother was born, and he has agreed to share some of that history with you tonight. 140 years old. The number echoed in my mind. This creature had been alive during the Civil War. He had seen the entire transformation of the Pacific Northwest, from wilderness to civilization. He had watched my people be pushed onto reservations, watched the forests be cut, watched the world he knew disappear piece by piece. What I learned that night, sitting in that hidden valley surrounded by beings that were not supposed to exist, was a history that no human had ever been told. A history that extended back thousands of years and contained truths about humanity that we had never wanted to face. The forest people had been watching us since the beginning. Remembers everything. Explained through my grandmother's translation, they had been here when the first humans crossed into North America during the last ice age. They had observed as those early peoples spread across the continent, developing different cultures and languages, learning to live in different environments. The forest people had always been more advanced in certain ways, more intelligent, more aware. But they had also always been fewer in number, slower to reproduce, more vulnerable to the disruptions that could destroy a small population. At first, the forest people had avoided the new humans entirely, retreating deeper into the forests and mountains as the human population grew. But over time, some of them had become curious. They had watched humans from hiding, learning their languages, understanding their customs, trying to comprehend these strange new creatures that seemed so similar to themselves in some ways, and so different in others. The first contact between our peoples happened thousands of years ago, my grandmother translated. A forest people who had ventured too close to a human camp was discovered by a young woman gathering berries. Instead of screaming or running, she offered him food. That began a relationship that lasted for generations, a secret friendship between one human family and one forest people who dared to trust each other. Remembers Everything made a long series of sounds, and my grandmother's face grew serious as she listened. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with emotion. He says that over the centuries, some forest people have tried to establish relationships with other humans. Sometimes it worked for a while. There were tribes who knew about them, who kept their existence secret, who lived alongside them in a kind of peaceful coexistence. Our tribe was one of them, but it always ended the same way eventually. What happened? I asked. Betrayal, my grandmother said simply. Humans always betrayed them in the end. Someone would tell another tribe, hoping to gain advantage, or someone would try to capture one of them, hoping to prove their power, or the relationship would simply be forgotten over generations, and the next group of humans would react with fear and violence when they encountered the forest people. Remembers Everything made more sounds, and what my grandmother translated next stayed with me for the rest of my life. He says that his people have been watching humanity for thousands of years. They have seen us at our best and at our worst. They have watched us develop agriculture, build cities, create art and music and philosophy. They have also watched us wage wars, commit genocide, destroy the environments that sustain us. and they have come to a conclusion about our species that we do not want to hear. What conclusion? I asked, though part of me did not want to know. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment. Then she translated Remembers Everything's words. He says that humans are a species at war with themselves, that we possess both the capacity for tremendous good and tremendous evil, and we have never figured out how to choose consistently between them. He says that other intelligent species on this planet, the dolphins, the elephants, his own people, they can be selfish or aggressive at times, but they do not systematically destroy their own habitats. They do not torture members of their own species for pleasure. They do not build weapons capable of killing everything on the planet. Only humans do these things. I wanted to argue, to defend humanity, but Remembers Everything continued, and my grandmother continued to translate. He says his people made a decision thousands of years ago to remain hidden from humanity, not because they feared us individually, but because they feared what we would do with the knowledge of their existence. They believed that humans would not be able to see them as equals, as fellow beings worthy of respect and protection. They believed that humans would see them as threats to be eliminated, or as resources to be exploited, or as curiosities to be studied and controlled. And the history of human contact with their kind has proven that belief correct every single time. The weight of those words pressed down on me. I was 11 years old, and a being who had lived for 140 years was telling me that humanity had been judged and found wanting, that our species was fundamentally broken in some way that other intelligent creatures were not. But he is still speaking with you, I said, grasping for hope. He is still sharing this with me. That means he believes some humans can be different, right? That some of us can be trusted? My grandmother smiled sadly. She asked Remembers Everything my question, and he responded with a long series of sounds and gestures. When she translated, I heard something that sounded almost like hope, though tempered by centuries of disappointment. He says that the keepers have always been the exception, that our family and families like ours in other tribes proved that individual humans could be trustworthy, even if humanity as a whole could not. He says the covenant between our peoples has survived for over 400 years because the keepers understood something that most humans do not. They understood that some knowledge must be protected rather than shared, that some beings have the right to exist on their own terms, without human interference or documentation, that the greatest gift you can give to another is sometimes simply to leave them alone. I spent 3 days in that valley, learning things I could barely comprehend. Remembers Everything and Walking Shadow took turns teaching me their history, their culture, their understanding of the world. I learned that they had their own religion, a complex belief system centered on the spirits of the forest and mountains. I learned that they mourned their dead with rituals that lasted for days, gathering from distant territories to sing songs that told the story of the departed's life. I learned that they had art, creating intricate patterns by weaving grass and bark, patterns that held meaning in their visual language. But perhaps the most significant thing I learned was their prophecy about humanity. Remembers Everything told me about a belief that had been passed down through countless generations of his people, a prophecy about the fate of our species. The prophecy said that humanity stood at a crossroads. One path led to what they called the Great Dying, a future in which humans would destroy themselves and most of the other life on the planet through war, pollution, and greed. The other path led to what they called the Great Learning, a future in which humans would finally recognize their place in the web of life and learn to live in balance with the world around them. The forest people had been watching for signs of which path humanity would choose for thousands of years, and according to Remembers Everything, the signs were not encouraging. He spoke of the weapons we had developed, of the forests we had destroyed, of the rivers we had poisoned, of the air we had filled with smoke. He spoke of the wars we had fought over pieces of land and differences in belief. He spoke of the way we treated each other, the cruelties we inflicted on members of our own species, for reasons that seemed incomprehensible to his kind. But, my grandmother translated, he also sees reasons for hope. He sees humans who protect the forests instead of cutting them down. He sees humans who devote their lives to understanding other species instead of exploiting them. He sees the keepers who have proven for over 400 years that humans can keep a promise, can respect the right of another being to remain hidden. And he believes that if enough humans can learn to think like keepers, to protect rather than exploit, to respect rather than dominate, then perhaps the great learning is still possible. I was 11 years old when I first visited that valley. I returned many times over the following decades, first with my grandmother and then alone after she passed in 1968. I watched as the forest people I had met grew older and eventually died. I watched as their children grew and had children of their own. I watched as their territory shrank and they were forced to move their hidden valley twice because of logging operations that came too close. Through it all, I kept the covenant. I never told anyone outside my family about what I knew. I never took photographs, never made recordings, never wrote anything down that could be discovered. I married a woman from our tribe who knew about my role but never asked questions, who understood that there were things I could not share even with her. I raised children and told them only what they needed to know, keeping the full truth for the one I would eventually choose as the next keeper. Walking Shadow died in 1993. He was over 100 years old by then, and his death hit me harder than I expected. He had been my teacher, my friend, the bridge between my world and theirs. When he was gone, I felt truly alone with the weight of the covenant. His daughter, Walk Silent, took over as guardian of the territory. She was warier than her father, more skeptical of humans, and our relationship never developed the same depth. But she tolerated my visits and allowed me to continue learning from the community, to continue documenting their history in my memory so that it would not be lost. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was 2018. I was 78 years old, and my health was beginning to fail. I knew I did not have many years left, and I had not yet found someone to pass the keeper's role to. My children were scattered across the country, disconnected from the old ways. My grandchildren were even more removed, growing up in cities where the forest was something you visited on vacation, not something that shaped your entire worldview. I made what I thought might be my final trip to the Hidden Valley that spring. When I arrived, I found the community in mourning. Walks Silent met me at the edge of the valley and communicated the news. Remembers everything had finally died. He had lived for over 170 years, and the weight of that history died with him. But that was not why the community was in such distress. Something else had happened, something that threatened everything they had spent centuries protecting. Walks Silent led me to the center of the valley, where the community had gathered. And there, lying on a bed of furs, was a young forest people, one I had known since his birth 15 years earlier. His name was Runs Fast, and he had always been curious, always pushing boundaries, always wanting to explore beyond the territory the community considered safe. He was dying. The story emerged through Walks Silent's gestures and vocalizations. Runs Fast had ventured too far from the valley, into an area where humans had set up a research camp. He had been curious about their equipment, their lights, their strange activities. And someone had seen him. The researcher who spotted him had not panicked. Instead, she had remained calm, had even tried to communicate. Runs Fast, foolishly, had approached closer than he should have. And then another member of the research team had appeared with a weapon. The shot had not been immediately fatal. Runs Fast had escaped, had made it back to the valley before collapsing. But the bullet was lodged deep in his chest, and there was nothing the community could do for him with their limited knowledge of such injuries. Runs Fast looked at me with eyes that were already growing dim, and he communicated something that I will never forget. He told me that the researcher who had first seen him, the woman who had not panicked, had tried to help. She had shouted at the man with the gun, had tried to stop him, and in that moment, Runs Fast had seen something he had never expected to see in a human outside the keepers. He had seen someone who recognized him as a person, not a monster, someone who wanted to protect rather than destroy. Runs Fast died that night, surrounded by his family and community. I participated in the mourning rituals, singing the songs I had learned over decades of visits, adding my voice to theirs in honoring a life cut short by human violence. And then I made a decision that would have consequences I could not foresee. I asked Walk Silent for permission to find the researcher who had tried to save Runs Fast. I explained that if she was truly different, truly capable of understanding and protecting their secret, then perhaps she could help in ways that I, at 78 years old, could not. Walks Silent agreed to let me try, but she made me understand the stakes. If the researcher betrayed them, if she revealed what she knew, it would not just endanger this community. It would endanger every forest people still alive, forcing them to flee deeper into wilderness that barely existed anymore. It might be the final blow that pushed them from endangered to extinct. Finding the researcher took several months. Her name was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife biologist from the University of Washington who specialized in large mammals. When Elena first saw Walk Silent emerge from the forest, she did not scream or run. She stood perfectly still, her hands visible and empty, her breathing controlled. Walk Silent approached slowly, then reached out and touched Elena's face, just as Walking Shadow had touched mine over 60 years earlier, and I saw Elena's expression change as the communication happened, as she felt the emotions that Walk Silent was sharing with her. When it was over, Elena was crying. "I felt her grief," Elena whispered, "for Runs Fast, for all the ones they've lost. And I felt something else, hope. She has hope that maybe this time, maybe with someone who understands both worlds, things could be different." That was 6 years ago. Elena is now the keeper, the first non-Native American to hold that role in over 400 years of history. The forest people have accepted her, not unanimously, but enough that the relationship can continue. And now I am telling you this story. Why? Because the forest people asked me to share their message, not the location of their territories, not their numbers, not anything that could be used to find them, but their existence, their intelligence, their judgment of humanity. They have one more message for humanity, one that Walk Silent asked me to share. They have seen us at our worst, and they have not given up on us. Despite everything, despite all the destruction and cruelty they have witnessed, they still believe we are capable of change. They still hope that we might learn to see ourselves as part of the web of life rather than its masters. They still wait for the day when they can emerge from hiding and be recognized not as monsters or curiosities, but as fellow beings worthy of respect. That day has not come yet. It may never come, but the forest people are patient. They have watched civilizations rise and fall while they remained, hidden in the forests, waiting. They can wait a while longer. The question is whether we will prove worthy of that patience, whether we will choose the great learning before the great dying makes the choice irrelevant, whether enough of us can become keepers, protectors of the wild places and wild things to change the trajectory of our species, the great dying or the great learning. The choice is still ours, but I have not yet told you the most important thing the forest people shared with me. the revelations that kept me awake at night for decades. The truths about humanity that remembers everything passed down before he died. Truths that his people had accumulated over thousands of years of watching us. This is what they wanted you to know. This is what they asked me to share before I leave this world. It began during my third visit to the Hidden Valley in the summer of 1954. I was 14 years old by then, no longer the frightened child who had first met Walking Shadow. I had visited the community half a dozen times, learning their ways, building relationships, beginning to understand the depth of their culture. But that summer, Remembers Everything called me to sit with him alone, away from the others. He had something specific he wanted to teach me, something he said the keepers needed to understand if they were to fulfill their purpose. We sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley as the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned orange and purple, and the first stars began to appear. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke from the community's evening fires below. Remembers Everything was silent for a long time, gathering his thoughts, deciding how to communicate ideas that had been passed down through countless generations of his kind. Then he began to share what his people had learned about humanity, not just observations but conclusions, patterns they had identified over thousands of years of watching us. And what he told me that evening, what he continued to teach me over the following decades, was a portrait of our species that we desperately need to understand. The first thing my grandmother translated during a later session when Remembers Everything wanted to ensure I understood completely is that humans are the only species we have ever observed that tells itself stories about what it is. Other creatures simply exist. They hunt, they mate, they raise their young, they live and die according to their nature. But humans create narratives. You tell yourselves that you are special, chosen, superior to all other life. You build religions and philosophies that place you at the center of existence, and these stories shape how you behave in ways that no other species experiences. I did not fully understand what he meant at 14, but over the years, as I watched human history unfold, as I saw the ways we justified our treatment of the natural world and each other, I began to grasp the profound insight in his observation. We are a storytelling species, and the stories we tell ourselves determine what we believe is possible, what we believe is permitted, what we believe is right. Remembers Everything continued. He showed me through gestures and sounds that my grandmother helped interpret, how the stories humans told themselves had changed over the centuries. In the earliest times when humans first arrived on this continent, the stories were different. The indigenous peoples told stories that placed them within the web of life as one creature among many, dependent on the others, responsible to them. These stories led to behaviors that the forest people could understand and respect. Not perfect behavior, but comprehensible, sustainable, part of a larger pattern that included all living things. But then new humans came, my grandmother translated. Humans with different stories, stories that said the earth and everything on it existed for human use. Stories that said some humans were superior to others based on the color of their skin or the god they worshipped. Stories that said progress meant domination, that success meant accumulation, that nature was a resource to be exploited rather than a community to which they belonged. Stories that said the future mattered more than the present, that growth was always good, that limits were obstacles to be overcome rather than boundaries to be respected. Remembers Everything made a sound of deep sadness. These new stories, he communicated, spread across the land faster than any disease. They infected even the peoples who had once lived in balance, and they led to behaviors that the forest people had never witnessed before in all their thousands of years of observing life on this planet. The complete destruction of forests, that had stood for thousands of years. The deliberate extinction of entire species for profit or sport. The enslavement and murder of millions of humans by other humans who had convinced themselves that their victims were somehow less than human. The poisoning of rivers and air that sustained all life, including the lives of the humans doing the poisoning. He paused, and when he continued, his communication carried a weight that I can still feel today, 70 years later. "We watched," he said. "We watched and we tried to understand. How could creatures so intelligent, so capable of beauty and kindness, also be capable of such destruction? How could the same species that created music and art and medicine also create weapons that could destroy the entire world? How could beings who clearly loved their own children harm the children of others without apparent remorse? For a long time, we thought humans must be two different creatures wearing the same skin. But eventually, we understood the truth. You are one creature with two natures, and you have never learned to choose between them consistently. That observation haunted me for years. I saw it everywhere. Once remembers everything pointed it out. The same civilization that produced Shakespeare and Mozart also produced slavery and genocide. The same nation that sent humans to the moon was poisoning its own water supply and imprisoning people for the color of their skin. The same individuals who loved their families deeply would vote for policies that harmed children they had never met. We were indeed one creature with two natures, and we seemed incapable of consistently choosing the better one. But remembers everything was not finished. Over the following years, he shared more of what his people had learned, and some of it was even harder to hear. The second thing he communicated during a visit in 1962 when I was 22 years old and struggling to find my place in the human world is that humans have a sickness in how they see time. Other creatures live in the present. They remember the past and anticipate the future, but they do not sacrifice the present for an imagined tomorrow that may never arrive. Humans are different. You are willing to destroy what exists now for something you believe will exist later. You cut down forests that have stood for centuries to build structures that will crumble in decades. You poison water that has been pure for millennia to create products that will be forgotten in years. You sacrifice real relationships for abstract goals. You spend your lives working for futures you may never reach, missing the actual moments of existence as they pass. You are the only species we know that will make itself miserable today in pursuit of happiness tomorrow, and then do the same thing tomorrow and the day after, never arriving at the happiness you seek. I thought about my own life when I heard this. How much time had I spent working for things I thought I needed, missing the moments that were actually happening? How many humans spent their entire lives chasing futures that never arrived, ignoring the present that was slipping away with every heartbeat? The forest people lived differently. They planned, they prepared, but they did not sacrifice the reality of now for the fantasy of later. They understood something we had forgotten, something our ancestors had known before the new stories infected us. The third thing remembers everything shared during what turned out to be one of our last conversations before my grandmother died in 1968 is about how humans treat difference. In our communities, when a forest people is born who thinks differently, or moves differently, or sees the world in unusual ways, we consider it a gift. Different perspectives help the community survive challenges it has never faced before. Different minds solve different problems. Diversity is strength, not weakness. But in human communities, difference is often treated as a threat. You attack those who look different, think different, believe different, love different. You create categories and hierarchies and spend enormous energy enforcing them. You have killed more of your own kind over differences that we cannot even perceive. than we have lost to all predators in all of our history combined. This observation cut deep because I had seen it in my own community. The way the government had tried to erase our language, our culture, our identity. The way children were taken from their families and sent to boarding schools where they were beaten for speaking their own tongue. The way anyone who did not fit the dominant story was marginalized, imprisoned, or destroyed. The forest people saw this pattern clearly because they stood outside it, and they could not understand why a species as intelligent as humans would waste so much potential by attacking its own diversity instead of celebrating it. But perhaps the most profound thing Remembers Everything taught me came during a conversation in 1987, just 6 years before Walking Shadow died. I was 47 years old by then, a grandfather myself, and I had been visiting the forest people for over 35 years. I thought I had learned everything they had to teach about humanity. I was wrong. We had been discussing the changes I had witnessed in my lifetime, the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the growing awareness among some humans that the old stories were leading us toward destruction. I was feeling hopeful, telling Remembers Everything that perhaps humanity was finally beginning to change, to choose the better nature over the worse one. The wheel seemed to be turning in a good direction. Remembers Everything listened patiently to my optimism. Then he shared something that I have thought about every day since. "You speak of change," my grandmother translated his response. "But we have watched humans for thousands of years, and we have seen these cycles before. There are always some humans who see clearly, who understand the damage being done, who work tirelessly to change direction, and there are always periods when it seems like change is possible, when the better nature seems to be winning, when hope feels justified. But then something happens. Fear rises. Old stories reassert themselves. Leaders emerge who appeal to the worse nature instead of the better one. And the destruction continues, often worse than before, as if the period of hope was merely a pause to gather strength for the next wave of devastation." He paused, and when he continued, his communication carried a warning that I felt in my bones. "We have identified the pattern," he said. "Humans change as individuals. One person can learn, can grow, can choose differently, can transform themselves completely. We have seen this many times. The keepers prove it generation after generation. But humans, as a collective, as a species, you do not seem able to sustain change. The individual transformations do not accumulate into species-wide transformation. Each generation must learn the same lessons again, and many do not learn them at all. Your progress is not progress. It is a wheel that turns but does not move forward. You return to the same mistakes, the same destructions, the same conflicts, as if the lessons were never learned at all." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to point to all the advances we had made, all the ways human society had improved over the centuries. But even as I formed the arguments, I knew he was right. We had ended some forms of slavery only to create new ones. We had stopped some wars only to start others. We had protected some forests only to destroy different ones. We had recognized the rights of some groups only to deny them to others. The wheel turned, but it did not move forward. Each generation faced the same fundamental choice between creation and destruction, and each generation was as likely to choose destruction as the ones before. Then Remembers Everything shared something that I have never told anyone until now. Something so disturbing that I buried it in the deepest part of my memory for decades. "We have discussed among ourselves," he communicated, "whether to reveal our existence to humanity. Every few generations the question arises. Perhaps if humans knew we were here, knew that they were being watched by another intelligent species, knew that their choices were being observed and remembered, perhaps that would help them change. Perhaps the shame of being seen would motivate them to be better. Perhaps the knowledge that they were not alone would humble them, would help them see themselves as part of something larger. He made a sound of profound sadness, but we always reach the same conclusion. If we revealed ourselves, humans would not see us as teachers or witnesses or brothers in existence. They would see us as either threats or resources. Some would want to kill us out of fear, the same fear that has driven so much of your violence throughout history. Others would want to capture and study us out of curiosity, reducing us to specimens in laboratories. Still others would want to use us to exploit whatever they could learn from our bodies or our knowledge for their own advantage. And the few who might want to protect us would be overwhelmed by the others. We have seen how humans treat the other intelligent species on this planet. The whales who are still hunted despite your knowledge of their intelligence. The great apes whose forests are destroyed despite their genetic kinship to you. The elephants killed for their tusks despite their complex social bonds. We would face the same fate and our extinction would serve no purpose. He looked at me with eyes that had seen 150 years of human behavior. So we remain hidden. We watch, we wait, and we hope that somehow, someday, humanity will learn to choose differently without needing us to teach them. Because if you cannot learn on your own, if you cannot find within yourselves the wisdom to change, our teaching would not help anyway. The change must come from within your species. We cannot give it to you. We can only hope that you find it before it is too late. I carried that conversation with me for the rest of my life. The image of these ancient, intelligent beings hiding in the forests, watching us destroy ourselves and the world around us, hoping against all evidence that we might change, but unable to help without risking their own extinction. It was the loneliest image I had ever encountered, and it forced me to confront a question I had been avoiding. What could I do? What could one keeper, one person who knew the truth, do to help humanity choose differently? The answer, I eventually realized, was almost nothing. I could protect the forest people's secret. I could honor the covenant. I could live my own life according to the principles they had taught me. But I could not change humanity. I could not make the wheel move forward instead of just turning. I was one person in a species of billions, and the forces pushing toward destruction were so much larger than anything I could resist. For many years, that realization filled me with despair. I would visit the forest people, participate in their rituals, learn from their wisdom, and then return to the human world and watch us continue to make the same mistakes. The forests continued to fall. The rivers continued to be poisoned. The wars continued to be fought over the same old differences, and nothing I knew, nothing I had learned from beings who had watched us for thousands of years, seemed to make any difference at all. But then something happened that gave me a different perspective. It was 1995, 2 years after Walking Shadow died. I was visiting the community to participate in a ceremony honoring his memory, and Walk Silent took me aside to share something. Her father had left a message for me, she communicated, something he had wanted me to know but had never found the right moment to share while he was alive. Walking Shadow had watched me struggle with despair for years. He had seen me carry the weight of the forest people's observations about humanity, seen me grapple with my inability to change anything, and he had wanted me to understand something that he himself had learned over his 100 years of life. The message Walk Silent shared was simple, but it transformed how I understood my role and my purpose. Walking Shadow said that you think too much about saving humanity, she communicated. You think your purpose is to change your whole species, and you feel like a failure because you cannot do it. But that was never your purpose. Your purpose is to be a keeper, to protect this secret, to maintain the relationship between our peoples, to prove generation after generation that at least some humans can be trusted with sacred responsibilities. That is enough. That is everything, she continued, sharing her father's final wisdom. He said that the forest people do not hope for humanity to change because they expect it to happen. They hope because hoping is part of who they are. It is what they have always done and what they will always do as long as they exist. They watch and wait and hope, not because they believe the outcome will be good, but because hoping is their nature, just as storytelling is yours. And they want the keepers to understand that their role is similar. You are not responsible for whether humanity chooses the great learning or the great dying. You are only responsible for keeping the covenant, for being a bridge between our peoples, for showing that humans can be better than their worst impulses. The outcome is not in your hands. Only your choices are in your hands. That message freed me from a burden I had carried for decades. I realized that I had been measuring myself against an impossible standard, holding myself responsible for changes I could never make. But Walking Shadow was right. My purpose was not to save humanity. My purpose was to be a keeper, to maintain the covenant, to prove through my own choices that the forest people's hope was not entirely misplaced. And that is the final lesson I want to share with you. The lesson that the forest people wanted humanity to hear. You cannot control what your species does. You cannot force billions of people to choose differently. You cannot make the wheel move forward through willpower alone. But you can control your own choices. You can decide in each moment whether to act from your better nature or your worse one. You can choose to protect rather than exploit, to understand rather than fear, to connect rather than dominate. And if enough individuals make those choices consistently, generation after generation, perhaps the wheel will finally begin to move. The forest people have watched us for thousands of years. They have seen every atrocity we have committed and every beautiful thing we have created. They have observed our capacity for both tremendous good and tremendous evil, and they have not given up on us. But their hope is not passive. It is not a belief that things will work out on their own. It is a commitment to keep watching, keep waiting, keep maintaining the relationships with keepers who prove that change is possible on the individual level. They hope because hoping is what they do, and they want us to understand that our hoping must be the same kind. We cannot guarantee the outcome. We cannot know whether humanity will choose the great learning or the great dying, but we can choose, each of us, every day, to act as if the great learning is possible. We can live as keepers, protecting what is precious, maintaining what connections we can, proving through our choices that humans are capable of being better than our worst moments suggest. I am 83 years old. I have carried this secret for 72 years. I have watched the forest people age and die and be replaced by new generations who carry the same ancient wisdom. I have seen humanity continue to struggle with the same fundamental choice, sometimes moving toward destruction, sometimes moving toward balance, never quite resolving the conflict between our two natures. And now, at the end of my life, I am sharing this story because the forest people asked me to. Not because they believe it will save humanity, not because they expect it to change anything, but because they want you to know that you are being watched, that your choices matter, that somewhere in the deep forests, beings who have observed you for thousands of years are still hoping that you will learn to be better. Elena Vasquez is the keeper now. She will continue the work that my family began over 400 years ago. She will visit the forest people, learn from them, maintain the covenant, prove that humans can be trusted with sacred responsibilities. And someday, she will pass the role to someone else, and the chain will continue for as long as both our peoples survive. But you do not have to be a keeper to live like one. You do not have to know where the forest people hide to protect the wild places where they might survive. You do not have to speak with them directly to understand the wisdom they have accumulated over thousands of years of watching us. The wisdom is simple. You are one creature with two natures. Every day, in countless small ways, you choose which nature to express. Those choices accumulate. They shape who you become. And collectively, the choices of billions of humans shape what our species becomes. The forest people cannot make those choices for you. The keepers cannot make those choices for you. Only you can decide, moment by moment, whether to move toward the great learning or the great dying. Only you can determine whether their hope in humanity is justified. I have told you what the forest people wanted you to know. I have shared the observations they have accumulated over thousands of years. I have passed on their message of cautious hope, tempered by centuries of disappointment. Now the knowledge is yours, and what you do with it is your choice. Remember that you are being watched. Remember that your choices matter. Remember that somewhere in the forests, ancient beings who have seen the best and worst of humanity are still hoping that you will prove worthy of this planet you inherited, the great dying or the great learning. The choice has always been ours. It still is. It always will be until the choice is finally made. My name is Joseph Clearwater. I am the last keeper of my line, passing the responsibility to a new generation. And this is the truth that the forest people wanted you to hear. May you choose wisely. May you protect what is precious. May you prove that human beings can be trusted with the sacred responsibility of existence. The forest people are watching. They have always been watching, and they will continue to watch long after I am gone, waiting to see what humanity finally decides to become. This is my testimony. This is their message, and now it belongs to you. There is one more thing I must tell you before I finish. Something that happened just last month. Something that convinced me the time had finally come to share this story. I was sitting on the porch of my small house on the reservation, watching the sun set over the mountains that have been my home for 83 years. Elena had visited the day before, bringing news from the forest people. Their numbers had stabilized, she said, not growing but no longer declining as rapidly as before. Some of the young ones had found mates from distant communities, bringing new genetic diversity. There was cautious optimism in the hidden valleys where they still survived. As I sat there, thinking about everything I had witnessed in my long life, a raven landed on the railing in front of me. Ravens are sacred to my people, messengers between worlds. This one looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold more intelligence than a bird should possess. And I found myself wondering what other secrets the forests might still contain. What other beings might be watching us from the shadows. The raven stayed for several minutes, long enough for me to feel that something was being communicated, though I could not say what. Then it spread its wings and flew toward the mountains, toward the deep forests where the forest people had hidden for thousands of years. I watched it disappear into the gathering dusk, and I made my decision. I would tell this story. I would share what the forest people had asked me to share. I would trust that somewhere out there, someone would hear it and understand. Because that is what keepers do. We carry the message. We maintain the connection. We hope, even when hope seems foolish, because hoping is part of who we are. The forest people taught me many things over 72 years. They taught me patience and observation. They taught me the value of silence and the power of presence. They taught me that intelligence can take many forms, and that wisdom often hides in places we would never think to look. But the most important thing they taught me was this: every ending is also a beginning. When remembers everything died, his knowledge passed to others who would carry it forward. When Walking Shadow died, his daughter took up his role as guardian. When I pass, Elena will continue the work. The chain does not break, it transforms. And perhaps that is the deepest truth about humanity as well. We are not a finished species, we are still becoming. The great dying and the great learning are not fixed destinations, but possible futures, and the path we take depends on the choices we make in each moment. We are always ending and always beginning, always dying and always being born. The forest people understand this. They have watched countless human generations come and go, each one making its choices, each one contributing to the unfolding story of our species. They do not judge us by our worst moments alone, because they know that we are still writing our story. The final chapter has not been written, and so they wait, and so they watch, and so they hope. I am tired now. The cancer that has been growing in my body for 6 years has finally begun to claim its due. The doctors say I have weeks, perhaps a month, but I am not afraid. I have lived a good life. I have kept my promises. I have maintained the covenant that my family has honored for over 400 years. When I die, I will be buried according to the traditions of my people, on land that has been sacred to us for generations. And somewhere in the mountains, I like to think that the forest people will sing one of their mourning songs for me, adding my story to the vast history they carry in their collective memory. I was a keeper. I did my part. And now I pass the responsibility to others, trusting that they will carry it forward into a future I will not live to see. To you who are hearing this story, I leave this final thought. The forest people have been watching humanity for thousands of years. In all that time, they have never encountered a species quite like us, a species capable of such heights and such depths, such beauty and such destruction. We fascinate them and terrify them in equal measure, but they have not given up on us. And if beings who have watched us for millennia, who have seen every atrocity and every triumph, who have every reason to despair, if they can still hope for humanity, then perhaps we should have the courage to hope for ourselves. The great dying or the great learning. The choice is being made right now, in this moment, in every choice you make. You are part of the story humanity is writing. What you do matters. How you live matters. The forest people are watching, and they are hoping you will choose well. Go now, live your life, make your choices, and remember that you are never truly alone. Somewhere in the deep forests, in the hidden valleys, in the wild places that still remain, ancient eyes are watching, ancient hearts are hoping, and an ancient wisdom waits to see what humanity will finally decide to become. This is Joseph Clearwater, Keeper of the Covenant, speaking to you from the edge of the forest, where my grandmother first showed me the truth about the world. The forest people send their greetings. They send their warnings. They send their hope. May you prove worthy of all three. The sun has set now. The stars are coming out over the mountains, the same stars that have watched over this land for billions of years. Somewhere out there in a hidden valley I will never visit again, the forest people are gathering for their evening songs. I can almost hear them on the wind, those voices that have sung through centuries, carrying the memory of everything they have witnessed. I close my eyes and I am 11 years old again, standing in that clearing watching walking shadow emerge from the shadows. I feel his massive hand touch my face. I feel the door open in my mind. I feel the connection that has defined my entire life. The forest people are real. They have always been watching, and they will keep watching long after all of us are gone, waiting to see what humanity finally chooses to become. This is my story. This is their message. This is the truth. Remember it.